culture, and heritage are not and cannot be bystanders in a global action on climate change. Through this initiative, we would like to reach out to all regions where climate-related stress are being witnessed.
Tuvaluan values of communal living systems, or olanga whakawhenua, shared responsibilities, or kaitasi, and being a good neighbor, or falepili, are critical to Tuvaluan ways of life and the consensus culture that has guided our nation for centuries. But these values are not only critical to Tuvalu, they are also critical to our global community.
Climate change will impact people's lives, livelihoods, and their way of life, reshaping economies, landscapes, and communities. To survive, people, particularly those most vulnerable, must build resilience. And the key to resilience are culture and heritage. Culture-based strategies emphasize important but often unrecognized local, traditional, and indigenous knowledge.
And human rights standards give a lot of directions when it comes to climate change. We have to remember that all states have agreed to respect and implement specific measures to ensure the elimination of non-discrimination. In this fight for climate change, non-discrimination also means specific positive measures to be taken by governments.
Culture contributes greatly to people's well-being, and it's instrumental in crafting a livable future.
It is the importance to recognise that climate change is a cross-cutting issue for all sectors, societies and regions across the globe, including for cultural and natural heritage.
For everybody to say, yes, there are these big organizations. Oh my goodness, how can I as one person or a small group of people do anything? The wonderful thing is, and I'm looking forward to this conference, is seeing how all these connections come together, and so that the next generation are able to say, we have a place, we are not insignificant, and we are going to make the difference working with all these big organizations.
One of the things that we say as Indigenous people is that we come from a world of we, not me. And so it's very, very important when we're looking at developing strategies to look at the collective well-being of not just Indigenous people, but our fellow Australians and indeed our global citizens.
Heritage is usually reduced to being a stable physical thing, and there's an essential culture which is somehow stable, no agency, no life. We have to think about how can processual notions of heritage contribute to peace building? How can a processual understanding of heritage help in the face of climate change?
Heritage is only heritage when it is valued and used by people to do things. For heritage to help us address peace, reconciliation, and climate change, we need to engage with research and professional practices. Interventions can be made into these processes to embrace and engage constructively with changing circumstances. I would also add we need to engage with how different communities use objects and places and sites. We are still working with the people whose utilisation of those sites and places has a consequence, as I said, for themselves, has a political and cultural social consequence for themselves.
Most cultural heritage stories in Vanuatu over the last 200 years feature stories of depopulation, largely due to epidemics and loss, whether cultural, linguistic or societal loss. And the compounded challenges of depopulation legacies and increasing contemporary environmental stresses due to climate change make efforts to record, revive and restore cultural heritage considerably complex and infinitely important.
So we used high-resolution historic and recent images to map this eroding edge, compare it to different time steps in order to find out how fast it was retreating over time. And these are examples of the images which we used. You can see a much more severe impact indicated by these red lines, with potentially half of these buildings eroded into the sea by the end of the century.
Climate change is central to the history of the African peoples, and beyond its effect and reverberating effect is the Hedas-Femers crisis, and it has materialized itself in Igbo history and it has been dealt with.
Porque a questão das mudanças climatéricas para pequeno estado insular, como é o caso de Cabo Verde, é problema sério, grave e transversal. Quando digo transversal, não afeta apenas o património, a cultura, mas também desde das outras áreas do setor económico e aqui acrescentar o próprio tecido social, ou seja, as comunidades que acabam por estar dependentes e vulneráveis também a essas às mudanças climáticas.
Climate-related changes in the rainfall pattern would lead to food insecurity, increasing migration and causing stress in the receiving communities as larger number of people compete for the same resources.
It's now really hard to find resources to build more of these granaries or repair these granaries because the forests are affected highly badly because of the climate change. If we want to preserve the rural heritage in here for longer terms, then actions should be taken to raise awareness about climate change and to mitigate the effects of climate change.
We could use culture for its strong communication systems, for its socially effective influence brokers, used in traditional and social gatherings a lot more than when we use other technologies. The geographic and cultural linguistic proximity, as I've mentioned, to revisit this thing of promoting guzzling consumerism and assert human dignity and diversity, and not make traditional ways look as if they are backward.
So I turned that indigenous knowledge into scientific knowledge and set up the center. And now the center attracts people from all over the world, and even the young generations are introduced to it.
الأهم شيء هو دمج العادات والتقاليد الموجودة في أرخبيل سقطرى بالعلوم الحديثة من أجل حماية هذا التنوع الحيوي وهذه العادات والتقاليد اللي موجودة في أرخبيل سقطرى. إشعار المجتمع المحلي بأنه شريك أساسي في إدارة الموارد الطبيعية وفي الحفاظ على الثقافة.
Un fragmento precisamente del lema de este día es cambiar el rumbo, transformar la educación, promover una educación transformadora. Y una educación transformadora es una educación que apuesta por la formación integral de las personas. Y desde luego desde la universidad creo que deberíamos de promover una ética de los cuidados en la que estamos todos los que nos dediquemos a la cultura, al patrimonio y a la educación.
I think the solution to that is to ensure that at least we create synergies, connections, we work as much as we can with the communities. The government, the policymakers, they need to make, collaborative decisions where they are ensuring that everyone is included.
We are also deciding on how we want to bring this culture moving forward to our generation and the next in the form of local knowledge, beliefs, arts, laws, customs, capability and habits of each individuals into the society.
Such observed negative consequent effects of climate change will contribute to the erosion and destruction of these heritage sites, which will not augur well for the Ghanaian heritage resource, with dire consequences not only for our national economy, but for the well-being of individual families and communities.
That our pathways must acknowledge that climate action and sustainable development are in fact two sides of the same coin, and that both require attention to the cultural dimension of inequality, poverty, and also just transactions.
We represent 5% of the world's populations, and we protect 80% of the world's biodiversity. That's also why when we are frontline of the climate change, we are also the solutions. So I do a traditional knowledge method with the science knowledge through a designing of the participatory mapping. In order to make it successful, you need the communities, and be sure to involve women. The women have a detailed knowledge on those traditional way of building the participatory mapping.
How do you get people to change the way their behavior? And one of the key things is tapping into culture and arts, reach far broader audience and get it into children's books and expand the education rather than having all of us sitting around in a white box and talking to each other.
Somewhere the culture
The people from cultural and heritage science also need to understand that what information they can bring in, which can be consolidated and used.
Policies should walk in the Anthropocene landscape, not only experts. And we need to produce tools and guidance. So we need those tools in national languages.
What I really want to emphasize is the very low levels of funding. Without funding, it's very hard to do this seriously.
Policy, especially how best to make culture more relevant, is really connect culture to land use so that policy can actually see how it all connects, but also how it brings in meaning and more value. And of course, engaging the youth, engaging young professionals everywhere from within communities, within policy, within civil society. The youth are super important in bringing in the message.
It's a place that organisations and individuals and communities can access information about climate change and about heritage. So I guess it's all about keeping this sort of sharing and learning and convening going is the immediate next step.
This conference is a really good example of how ICCROM, can try to bring all of these experiences together and share them in a wider way. So these are the kinds of things that we need to continue doing, and we need to touch more people, I would say, on the ground. It'll be a never-ending work, but that's okay. There's no problem with that. We'll keep doing it.
If we lose the land, we lose the culture. Lose the culture, lose the peace. Lose the peace, lose the community. Lose the community, lose our way of life forever.